So, Andrew, and I like to entertain. I want the meal to be memorable.
Okay.
So what does that mean? It has to be delicious.
Right. But to get there, you also need fabulous taste combinations, a lovely presentation.
Right. Those things are all really important. So I was so excited when I got from Art Scroll More Real Life Kosher Cooking. That's Miriam Pascal's new book. And what she does there is shows us how to create memorable dishes with approachable recipes. So what does that mean when it's approachable? So think simple, common sense preparation. You don't need any fancy equipment, no hard to find ingredients, just great ideas, fantastic results, and lots of love.
That sounds great. And you can find more of Miriam's recipes, which she shares on her popular blog, Overtime Cook, and in her best-selling cookbooks, Something Sweet and Real Life Kosher Cooking.
Yeah, I made the roasted cauliflower poppers for Shabbos last week. And what's great about that recipe is it's an alternative to the breaded or fried or less healthy cauliflower popper recipes or that you see like in a restaurant.
Right.
And I have to say they were delicious and they were super easy.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So if you want to order more real life kosher cooking online at artscroll.com, you can use the code LMPE to get 10% off your order plus free shipping in the U.S. or visit your local Judaica store. Hello, and welcome to Let My People Eat, a podcast that provides satisfying talk about kosher nutrition. Here we clear through the clutter of nutrition speak, arm you with the clarity and confidence to eat, feel, and be your healthiest every day. I am Jill Scharfman, a board-certified holistic nutritionist living in Los Angeles.
And I'm Dr. Andrea Moskowitz, a neuroscientist and psychiatrist in Los Angeles. I use my training and experience to integrate positive lifestyle changes into my patients' lives.
So, how are you doing, Andrea?
I'm doing well, Jill. How are you doing?
I am doing well, thank you. So we got a follow-up question to episode 67.
Okay.
So I'm going to read it to you. Hi, Jill and Andrea. I listened to your gluten-free episode recently, and I loved it. Since then, I have heard that even if you're sensitive to gluten, you can eat sourdough because it is fermented. Is this true? Why would fermentation change the way your body tolerates certain foods? Thanks for your help, Batsheva. So I find that a very interesting question because, as you know, we've talked about, I've also backed off from gluten.
Right.
And it's a great alternative to have sourdough as an option because you can 100%. Also use it for challah for Shabbos. You can wash for it. It's not like maybe some of these other gluten-free alternatives that are a shahakol. So in order to find out more information, we invited onto the podcast the Sourdough Queen. So Sarah is a busy mom of 3 who loves to cook healthy food for her family. When she came across a beautiful photo of sourdough bread about 7 years ago, all she could think about was serving this fresh, crusty bread. Once she learned that sourdough is actually healthy, her determination to succeed at this intensified. Sarah hosted her very first sourdough workshop over 5 years ago and created an online course and sourdough community. Many people who sign up for her workshops are newbies who know nothing about this process and are baking their own sourdough breads in their home within 3 weeks. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Jill and Andrea. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. So tell us a little bit more about why sourdough? How'd you come to that was what you really focused in on? Because I have to say I've tried doing it and I have struggled. So I'm really curious to hear how you make this easy and accessible.
So funny backstory. I actually, when I started the sourdough journey was right after my husband had terrible sciatica at the time. And I switched over my entire diet, my family's diet, to healthier alternatives, cut down all the sugar, all the processed food, no corn syrup, and try to basically go back to basics and cook and bake only whatever is seasonal, whatever I could get. My weekly grocery shopping is usually the most part of it is produce, and I use a lot of that. Right. But there was one problem. My husband loves sandwiches. this is his dream was to have a sandwich shop. Like, he loves creating sandwiches. So giving up bread was very hard for him. Mm-hmm. Right. At the time, I tried spelt. Mm-hmm. I did everything spelt, and it definitely helped, but it wasn't the greatest.
Right.
So when I came across sourdough, I figured I would try it just because I thought it was a cool bread. I didn't even know that it was healthy. Mm-hmm. But when I was doing some research and I was trying to figure out where, like, how to do the bread and how to do how to make sourdough and a starter and all that, the little resources that was out there, like in those like 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was very little resources. It was all from health food blogs.
Right.
So I right away figured that it must be healthy, and I started doing some even more research.
Yeah. So maybe we should back up a little bit before
Right. So that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So let me back up now and explain why it's healthy and what sourdough is.
Right.
So that's basically how I got into sourdough. Mm-hmm. Of course, the more research I did, the more I found out all the health benefits. So what sourdough is fermented. It has no commercial yeast.
Right.
What many people know, the yeast that you use for bread is the commercial yeast that you could pick up in a supermarket. Right. This is, it's referred to as wild yeast or sourdough, mm-hmm. and it's just flour and water and bacteria. So you start it by just mixing some flour and water, and you let all the bacteria, the good bacteria, to start growing on your flour and water, and it starts eating on the starch. Just to put it like on a very understandable level for many people, it's like acidophilus. Right. It's just like you would eat yogurt or acidophilus or even fermented food.
Right. It's a type of probiotic. And probiotics have been shown to improve immune function and digestive and heart health. And so there are beneficial bacteria that are found in certain foods like sourdough, like kefir, like sauerkraut. And I believe sourdough also has prebiotics that are non-digestible fibers that feed the good bacteria. So it's a really good package deal.
So here's where it gets fun, though. Mm-hmm. A lot of people say when you bake your bread, you're burning off or baking off all those good bacteria, so you don't really get all the good bacteria in it.
Right.
But this is the fun part. Mm-hmm. I like to explain to people, because this is where, like, you got that email, that question from, I believe it was Batsheva.
Yes.
About gluten-free and bread.
Right.
So sourdough bread is essential. It's not gluten-free. So anyone who has been diagnosed with celiac, it's not something I think I would recommend, but again, I wouldn't know.
Right.
There are probably a large percentage of people are gluten
intolerant. Yeah.
Or gluten
tolerant, gluten sensitive.
Right.
What that means is that their body has a hard time to break down the gluten. It's not that it's allergic to the gluten. You're not. So what happens? So what does sourdough do? All the good bacteria in the starter, when you ferment your dough, it breaks down the gluten. Right. So by the time you're eating it, your body is not working on breaking down the gluten, and your body could just digest and absorb all the good bacteria, minerals, vitamins. Wheat has some really great vitamins, folic acid, but if your body is busy breaking it down, it's not digesting it and it's not absorbing it. That's where sourdough comes in.
Right. And also sourdough has lower levels of phytate, which are considered anti-nutrients because they end up binding to minerals in the body, reducing your body's ability to absorb them. So it actually works on that level as well.
And it breaks down the phytic acid as well. So, so you're getting some more. So that's where a lot of people confuse sourdough with gluten-free. Mm-hmm. It's not gluten-free, but it definitely, a lot of people who have gluten intolerance or who have issues when they eat bread, but they don't know what it is. They feel tired. They get inflamed. Could be inflammation in any sort of way. Like, people ask me, what, your husband's sciatica was healed by it? No, the sourdough didn't heal his sciatica, but he's not getting inflammation from it.
Right. Which is so important. And also, I'm wondering if sourdough is good for diabetics, because the fermentation does reduce the glycemic index. and could slow down the speed at which
so
sugar.
That I got like 50-50. Whenever people come to my workshop, I would have some people tell me that it really did help them and they can eat this bread over anything else. And some people say that they didn't see much of a difference. So I did some research. I tried to search it and try to figure out why. I think that there isn't enough research out there yet, but it definitely does help some people. Yeah. So I always say proceed with caution if you want to try it, and just keep on checking, your levels and everything. But I definitely, some people did tell me that this is what they can eat.
Right. And I think it probably, for those, may also make a difference what other foods you're eating, in addition to the sourdough.
You mean for the blood sugar?
For the blood sugar, for the blood sugar control.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if let's just take somebody who's not only eating sourdough bread, but they're also eating other foods that contain more active probiotics for them. So they're eating, yogurts with active cultures, or they're taking a good probiotic supplement, or they're other things. So those other probiotics produce different compounds that studies indicate can help with blood sugar control and help with decreased diabetes.
Right. Okay.
So
that is so interesting.
So the probiotics that are made during fermentation can really help on a lot of different levels.
Fermentation of other foods.
Right. So there are quite a few ways that fermented. We're not just talking also sourdough now. Sourdough happens to be a fermented food, but so we talked about it improves digestive health. It also improves your immune system. Right. And many fermented foods are rich in vitamin C, iron, and zinc, which we know are all very good for boosting your immune system. Right. And also, these foods can help you recover faster when you're sick.
Right.
So it's just good to include fermented foods in general when you're eating in your diet, sourdough being one of them.
Right.
The other thing is it makes foods, like we said, easier to digest. Right. Because like we were talking about the phytates and the lectins. These are compounds that are found in seeds and nuts and grains that could interfere with nutrient absorption. So if you eat fermented foods like tempeh, right, it could help with absorption of these nutrients.
Right.
Okay, so other potential benefits of eating sourdough. It's shown to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. Okay. Yeah. Again, because of the bacteria, the healthy bacteria in the gut.
Right.
It could be helpful with weight loss.
Are you talking about sourdough?
I'm talking fermented
foods.
Fermented foods.
You just said sour. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Fermented foods.
That's what I was looking at.
And heart health also.
Right.
Because it lowers the risk of heart disease.
Right. And it also can help with bone formation, decrease osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm.
It may be tied to behavioral development.
Right.
Some of these are in progress. And it helps regulate blood vessel formation, fat storage. So I think as time goes on, because this is a relatively new field to look at,
mm-hmm.
You mentioned, like even a couple of 5 or 6 years ago, there wasn't so much about sourdough.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's become more and more knowledge about what's called the gut microbiome,
mm-hmm.
and the role of fermented foods in that. And I think it's going to start looking at the role of the different bacterial species.
Right.
Because some have already been looked at specifically for certain specific things like osteoporosis. But I think now there'll be more research. Hopefully there'll be more and more research on it.
All right, so, Sarah, there are a couple of sourdough myths out there. Number one, baking sourdough bread is a time-consuming process. True or false?
False. It's time. It takes time for it to ferment, but during those hours, you don't have to physically work. So the actual work that you're physically doing, putting up the dough and shaping the dough, would take less than 30 minutes from beginning to end. It has to be cut because first you're putting up the dough, that would take about 4 to 5 minutes. And then when you're shaping the dough, that will take another 5-10 minutes. But in between those steps, you're just letting your dough sit. So you're letting your dough sit for 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours. Some like to ferment it even for 24 hours. They say that they feel a difference. The longer it ferments, the more it has time to break down all that gluten.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a lengthy process, but it's not a lengthy process that you're busy with.
It's not hands-on. And then,
No.
So I think you just debunked sourdough myth number 2, that it's a complicated process. So in your mind, I mean, like I said, I've tried before. I did get a sourdough starter, and I had to feed it. And I don't know. I guess I have to take your workshop. So
Right.
it's not.
So after teaching so many years, I realized where people get stuck and why people feel overwhelmed by certain steps. And I try to just simplify everything and just put everything into your daily routine. If you need to feed your starter every morning, put it into your routine. So it's just like you wake up and you brush your teeth, you go down and have coffee, and you feed your starter. What I teach also in my workshop is how you could put away your starter for a lengthy time without it going bad. So you don't always have to be busy with it. I think that's what overwhelms a lot of people. They don't want to have to feed their starter every single day. So sourdough, there is no right or wrong way when you make sourdough. That's why if anyone would search sourdough, if you search on Google sourdough tips, how to make sourdough, you could come up with over 100 different groups, blogs, people, Instagram accounts, and everyone's going to have a different way how to make sourdough. And I think that's what also throws a lot of people off, because they'll jump around from this account to that account, but this one said to feed it 3 times a day, and that one said to only use this flour or that flour. My suggestion is to find one person that you really like and stick with their method.
Good. So sourdough myth number 3, sourdough bread needs special tools and equipment. True or false?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, when I started, I didn't have anything. I didn't have this special basket that it's called a Benetton or a proofing basket. I didn't have any mixing tools. I didn't have a razor blade, lame, they call it. You spell it Lame, pronounced lame. That's what you make. You score the bread on top. I didn't have that either. I used a kitchen knife or even a chicken shears. You can just snip it. It's all those things I always suggest after you start baking sourdough and you figure out what you really need. And if you want to really invest in it, then you can invest. But it's absolutely not necessary.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you are fermenting foods other than sourdough at home, I just want to note that so if you're making something like sauerkraut,
right,
make sure you follow the recipes very closely for safety purposes, because if the temperature is not right or the fermentation time or unsterile equipment can cause food to spoil to make it unsafe to eat. Right. And also, if you're buying commercial fermented products, you just have to read the labels, make sure they don't contain high levels of added sugar or salt or fat, so that you make sure you are making a healthy choice. Yeah.
My understanding also is that if you want to get the good probiotics and stuff, you're looking for things that are fermented without vinegar.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Because that's used a lot in commercial sauerkraut. So you want more like a raw sauerkraut.
Right. So Sarah, here's my biggest question for you: is that where do you get the starter from? A kosher starter.
So you can start your own starter.
Right.
In my course, I actually teach how to start a starter. And I've had so many successful students. They keep posting in the community beautiful starters that they started from scratch. In the beginning, it's not going to be as strong and bubbly, but the more you feed it, like now we're 6 months later and there's starters that they show me. It's amazing to see.
Can you define what feed it means? For people who really don't know anything about this.
Right. So when you feed a starter has to get fed. Feeding means when you just essentially give it more food, which in a sourdough starter is flour and water, equal amounts by weight, not by not measurements like cups because that's different. So you would put in 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour to your existing starter and mix it up. And that's how it gets more food. And then the bacteria starts eating on the starch over there and breaks everything down.
Okay.
So that's also one of the myths going back is that you have to feed a starter every day. But once you have an established starter, it doesn't have to be fed every day. You could just store it in the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding getting a starter, I always suggest to ask around in your community. There are so many people baking sourdough now. If you know anyone in your community you trust, then take a little bit from them.
Right.
It's always fun to get someone else's starter.
I know here in LA, Zulika, who was on the podcast talking about clean skincare, I know she has a sourdough starter that or her husband actually, who's very happy to share. So if anybody's in LA and wants to get starter, let me know and I will put you in touch with her because that's the one that I had and then I killed. Would that be the correct term?
Yes, you can kill a starter. It's not very likely if you know what you're doing, but it is possible.
Which, obviously, I can't keep a house plant either. So
I can't keep a house plant, and I was able to keep a starter for 8 years now, 7 years now.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow.
My starter is old and it's really happy and very strong.
Right.
So yeah.
And do you share your starter with people?
Yes, I do.
You do?
And it's funny because the starter picks up all the bacteria from the environment. So you can get a starter from someone, but then like 3 weeks later, you could feed it the same flour, but then you'll smell your starter. It's going to smell a little different than the other one. And your end result might even taste a little different because it's a living thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so interesting how it's also tangy and tart and like sourdough, real sourdough has such a distinct
Not necessarily.
No?
That's another myth. That's another myth. People think that sourdough is sour or tart or tangy, like you mentioned.
Right.
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
If you have a fresh starter, meaning that if you fed it, if you use it right after feeding it, like you feed it and you let it rise just for 2-3 hours and you don't let it fall or you don't let it sit out for too long, then your starter does not have to have a tangy taste or smell at all. Whenever I bake bread for friends, family, or even if I go to a sourdough workshop and they taste the bread and like everyone would be shocked. Wow, it's not sour.
Right. Do you use sourdough on Shabbos, like for?
Yeah, I only use sourdough.
Yeah.
I make sourdough babka, sourdough pretzels, sourdough pies.
So if you want more information on Sarah's workshops, as well as many firsthand tips and tricks, you can visit her website, spiceandzest.com. So Sarah, are your all of your recipes on your website?
Well, currently at this time, I am working on transferring all my recipes from my Instagram account to my site. I have quite a few recipes on my site already, but if you're looking for something specific, it might be on my Instagram account. You could just scroll through and it should be there.
Okay. And you can follow Sarah on her Instagram at Spice and Zest to see what her next kitchen adventure will be. You can follow me on Instagram at Jill Scharfman. I want to thank our engineer, Mike Cassantini at the Network Studios. And Sarah, thank you. I think I'm going to have to go find Zulika and get the starter and put Gabrielle, my daughter, in charge of it.
Yeah, you definitely should. It is so simple.
You know, we'll refer to everything you've posted and try and make this work because I really would like to do this. I bet you would too.
I would too. I would really like to try this.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
And that is it for this episode of Let My People Eat. Please visit our website at letmypeopleeat.com and leave us a comment. Get in touch at our email at podcast@letmypeopleeat.com or call us at 317-659-0004. Post on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook with the hashtag #LetMyPeopleEatPodcast. If you like this show, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Tell your friends and family and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts.
And please remember that although we are certified professionals, this is not a medical advice podcast. No content, posts, or comments should be interpreted as professional guidance. always speak to your own health practitioner about making the right life changes for you.
Until next time, I am Jill Scharfman.
And I'm Andrea Moskowitz.
Thanks for joining us.
And go in good health.